Welcome to Mic Drop with Meg Green, presented by Can Broadcast Talent Coaching. I'm your host, Meg Green. Mic Drop is a conversation with friends, colleagues, and new acquaintances who are out there in the media industry making it happen every day. We'll share lessons and explore how the right coaching can take your career and your on air game to the next level. Please welcome Scott Masteller.
Thanks, Meg. It's good to be here.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for joining
Hi.
us today.
Absolutely.
So you and I have spent a lot of time talking about coaching and feedback over the years, and I know it's a role that you take a lot of pride in and a lot of people seek you out because of your experience and your ability to help develop people. My first question for you is when did you realize that coaching and feedback was critical to your own professional success?
So I started in sports radio as a talent. I was hosting shows. And I started in a small market, moved around a number of different locations. I finally ended up in Portland, Oregon. And when I was in Portland, I was hosting Afternoon Drive. And I had a new midday host who had just come in from Tampa who thought he was pretty good. His name is Colin Cowherd. And that was probably where, you know, I respected him so much, but I wanted to help him get better at things. And I learned, through working with some great general managers, feedback has to be part of the process for everybody. But what I learned also is how to give feedback. And that's when it started to click with me. The best story I can tell about Colin, I had a nice office with a big window, people could see in my office. And I sensed that Colin didn't like having people see he's in the principal's office.
Mhm.
So I changed my approach. There was a little pizza joint in Portland we could go to and sit in the back of the restaurant, and he was all ears. He was all in on everything.
Mhm.
So that's where it all started. And that's where I realized every talent has a different way you want to deal with them
Mhm.
because every talent is unique in their own approach to things. I can tell you that there are some talent I could give them, a 5-page written analysis and they'll soak it up.
Right.
Um, I just have a new talent in Philadelphia who's that way. He's a former attorney who decided he wanted to do sports radio. So I gave him just a content monitor the other day and we talked about it. I have other people that they just want to be talked to in bullet points, give me the highlights. And then it's also just talking with other people who have been successful in the business and
Mhm.
understand how to talent coach. And I soaked it all up. Two of the names that really were important to me, a guy by the name of Rick Scott, who's one of the best broadcast consultants I've ever known. He taught me sports radio when I got hired in Lexington, Kentucky. He basically came in, they put me in a conference room for 3 days, and it was like going to school, and I had
Mhm.
to take a test. And the other is a guy that hired me at ESPN, Bruce Gilbert, who I still talk to today, one of
Yes.
the most brilliant minds in sports. So it's always about getting the opportunity to hear from others and getting better at your craft.
Did you just mention two people who invested in you? Did you seek them out, or did they notice in you that there was an opportunity to work with someone who would take that feedback and incorporate it?
So Rick Scott, it's a funny story. I was calling minor league baseball in Wichita, Kansas, double A team. Best time of my life. I worked for the team. I made no money. I still have, the letter from the general manager saying we'll pay you like $180 a week. And I took the job over the phone, much to the dismay of my wife. Uh, but I had sent a tape out for the job in Lexington and he heard it and he said he heard something. And the person that owned the station in Lexington was not a big market, but he was a former executive at ABC, Jeff Trumper. And basically they had him on retainer and he's the guy that came in and started teaching me about all this stuff. And I worked with Rick in markets all across the country. And I worked with Rick when he was in Seattle and I was at ESPN. And to this day, he's one of my closest friends. We talk every couple of weeks. We're both near retirement, but we still have a lot of opinions and we're both trying to help people. Bruce Gilbert is somebody that just I got to know a little bit. reading about him. I reached out to him. We became friendly. But we were actually competitors. When I was in Dallas, I was putting a start on for ESPN 103.3, and he was the program director of the almighty Ticket, 1310 The Ticket, which to this day is the number one sports station in Dallas and could be one of the top three or four in the country. But Bruce and I were both workers that were always obsessed. I remember a couple of times having email exchanges with him at midnight because we were both still working to make our stations better. Eventually, Bruce got the gig as the head guy in programming in Bristol at ESPN. And my role was with ESPN ABC, where they owned the five stations. And I would go to the five different markets to give feedback and analysis. And finally, when I would do a yearly meeting with Bruce, and I had a yearly meeting with Bruce, and Bruce goes, I want you to come to Bristol and run things for me for the programming side. So what does that tell you? And this is what I tell everybody. Whether you've got a job or you don't have a job, you need to be networking all the time, just reaching out, building relationships, having conversations, but also knowing how to do that so that you don't become a pain in the rear to the person you're
Right.
talking to. Because people like myself and Bruce hear from hundreds of people all the time that want to get into the industry. Um, but if you're able to build a relationship, you're going to get to be in a better place. That's a really, I've talked about our new host in Philadelphia, Bill Colarulo, owned his own law firm for 15 employees, made a lot of money. He had been reaching out to myself and the other sports station in town. And all of a sudden I took a gamble on him. I said, okay, I'll give you a weekend show. And he did really well right out of the gate. And within 2 years, he's hosting Afternoon Drive in a major market because he did all the right things. And he also saw the value of coaching and feedback. And he's one of those guys, and this we can talk about this, but the great talent are always thirsty for more. They're never satisfied.
Right. I think you just mentioned something that I was going to ask you about, so it's a great transition to networking. Um, just from a personal perspective, when I had graduated college and I was starting my career and sort of wandering because I wanted to get into a different part of the media industry and it wasn't happening very well. But someone pulled me aside at this relatively small company to me. It might have been big in the industry, but I had never heard of them before. And this gentleman pulled me aside and he said, "This is a small industry. You need to start building your network. You need a list of contacts that you make." And he gave me tips on when you meet someone, Scott Masteller, he's at ESPN. Maybe you talk about something that's personal, make a note of that. Scott he loves jazz music. Okay, great. The next time that you see Scott or you run into him at a conference, you can say, "I don't know if you remember me, but we met at such and such occasion and you and I talked about jazz." And immediately the light bulb goes off and you're starting to build this rapport and build this network. I didn't understand that. I didn't do internships in college. My focus was elsewhere. I was working and doing other things, but not focused like career internship wise. So the networking aspect, I think, is really critical. And I think a lot of people don't understand how to do it and sort of how to make it work for you. And I have an opinion and I'll share it, but I'm curious for you when you talk to someone about networking, what's one or two things that you tell them to help them get started, to help them, make this work for themselves?
So you can't do this alone. That's probably my biggest word of advice. I had an uncle that I was very close to, um, passed away several years ago. He owned his own jazz club in Hilton Head. And I would go down to see him, to work with him, was involved in a charity, but he was also an HR guy from one of the big resorts at Hilton Head. And obviously, he was very close to my dad as well. So he told me stories about my dad I've never heard before. But we would have these conversations about how to get ahead, what you need to do. And I remember it like yesterday. He goes, Scott, you need to have your own board of directors. And I'm like, okay, what do you mean? I said, you need to have 4 or 5 people that you can go to on a regular basis, to get feedback and input on what you're doing. Doesn't matter, who they are, but, one person might be someone you talk to all the time. One person might be someone you talk to once or twice a year.
Mhm.
And so I put together a list of like 4 or 5 people. My wife is actually, she's one of them. Rick Scott, the consultant, is there. Bruce Gilbert. Uh, Bob was my uncle, was on it for a while. A GM that I worked with in Portland, who I only talked to once or twice a year, but he impacted me more in a year and a half of working for him than anybody else. You just find these people that do that. The other thing which you talked about, which is really important, networking is kind of like a full-time job. You got
Hmm.
to be doing it all the time so that, you're ready for what may come your way. And I don't mind sharing the story because you know it. My time was up at ESPN. It happens for a lot of us. It was a phenomenal experience. I've always told anybody that if you can have the opportunity to work there, you should take it.
Hmm.
But, one day came and I had to leave and I didn't know what was going to go on at that point. And the next day, I had three phone calls from different organizations wanting to talk because it was in the trades. There are people I'd all networked with over the years.
Right.
Um, and eventually, the next job I took, which was at a news talk station in Baltimore, I oversaw the Ravens and the Orioles. The GM knew a lot of the people I knew, and that helped him decide that I was the right person. Um, Networking should start as soon as you get your first gig,
Yes.
and keep notes, reach out to people, do it on a regular basis. I have associates that I haven't worked with in years, but I still reach out to see how they're doing because I think
Hmm.
it should be reciprocal. As much as you're networking for your own good, you should be networking to help others as well. And just by doing that, and I've told people, I said, you may build a relationship and nothing may be there for 5 years, and all of a sudden one day the phone's going to ring. And that's the difference in terms of being able to get ahead, in a way that really makes sense to me.
One of the things that you mentioned that I think is really critical is in building that relationship as you're building your network. You said a lot of things I could comment on, but I tell people you're not the point of building your network is not to ask for something. It's building a relationship. It's getting to know the person, finding out what they're doing, being aware of what they're doing, and being able to compliment them ideally in their success. So if you follow someone on social media and they post something about something great that's happened for them, or they had a call in a game that you thought was fantastic, tell them, be a part of their success. And as you said, reach out with some consistency. There's a fine balance between, persistent and annoying.
Yeah.
But over time, what you find, to your point, is I had a scenario happen years ago, and um, I had three people reach out to me that were sending me emails of support when I didn't even know they were aware of what's going on. I hadn't called them. I hadn't talked, to your point, I hadn't talked to one of them in several years, actually two of them, because they had both moved away and semi-retired. So we weren't, in each other's orbit on a daily basis. But to get that support from people that I have worked with, but didn't realize that they were paying attention to what was happening with me, was so incredibly valuable. It lifted my spirits at a time when I needed a little push, and it was just amazing. So I think to your point, networking is critical. Your board of directors is fantastic. That's something that someone had shared with me probably 15 or 20 years ago to do the same thing. And I usually share that with on-air talent in my coaching sessions is you need people around you who will give you honest, critical feedback. We love your parents, but the comment that you looked great today is important because your physical appearance matters. But you need the critical feedback on how you sounded. Were you confident? How was your cadence and your pacing? Did you
Correct.
tell me anything? Are you conveying anything? And some of the more critical reviews of your work is really helpful. And I think people forget that level of investment by a relationship you've developed is actually a personal investment in you. It's not someone giving you critical feedback to make you feel badly about something that happened. It's their way of picking you up and supporting you as you move into the next level of making these changes, in how you approach your work. So um, it's really important.
Well, I think, it's about understanding each individual talent, what their skill set is.
Mhm.
I've worked primarily in radio, I feel one of the advantages I have, I used to be on the air 4 hours a day. And unless you've sat in a studio behind a microphone and done that,
Yes.
it's hard to comprehend how difficult that is,
Hmm.
because everything, by the way, everything has changed dramatically. When I got into radio, I was playing records. I was using cart machines. Um, Back then, the big three were radio, television, and newspapers.
Yes.
I remember when USA Today started, I'm like, this is a prep magazine. That was what I used to, I was playing music before I got into sports. Whereas today, you got social media, you got all these different platforms, and you have to be everywhere with what's going on. But in terms of, you know, connecting with talent, I actually, when I was at ESPN, I built a talent criteria for radio host. You may have seen it because I think I brought it to a meeting, and I still use it to this day. I modify it every year,
Yes.
and um, it's very difficult to find someone who will master all 20 of those criteria. I found some talent are better at some things than others, and you try to amplify that for the betterment of where they're going to go in their career.
Right.
Um, so I think that becomes part of it. And, the big thing is, especially like in my medium, I'll hear a talent go, "Did you hear my show today?" I'm like, "No, I didn't. I was in a meeting. What would you like me to poll?" And I'll check it out
Right.
for you. Don't ever lie to a talent. That's gonna put you in a bad place. Um, Make sure you mention the good things that are going on. Because if you're working, on the air and you're getting compensated, somebody believes you've got talent. They
Right.
don't just put anybody on the air. And then, you can say, well, I listened to this and I think this is really good. And I think over here is an opportunity for you to improve your presentation. Watch your language. Don't be negative, but be honest,
Hmm.
and to this day, I have talent that I worked with in different markets. They will still call me, Scott, would you mind listening to 10 minutes of this and give me what you think? I'm like, well, I'm a little busy, but I can get it done in the next week. And I will do that for just about anybody because
Right.
I remember what it was like when I was trying to get to the point where I was going to be pretty good on the air. And, you know, a lot of people will look for feedback. One of the biggest mistakes that some places make is because you have so much on your plate, you don't prioritize the importance of sitting down with the talent, And by the way, there's so many different ways to give feedback. It can be we're going to have a session, we're going to look at video, we're going to listen to content. It could be you're in the hallway and you just heard something and you're having a one-on-one conversation. Could be you're going to be out having dinner. Um, it's not one size fits all. That's the
Right.
thing that is most important.
Something else that I learned from you because I wasn't sitting in your chair, at ESPN was the amount of preparation that the radio talent do before they go on the air. And you would expect that of the level of talent who are there. But I think when you listen to someone who sounds so natural and at ease on air, same with television, as a medium, they're well rehearsed, and I don't mean rehearsed in a canned way. They work at their craft. They put a lot of preparation in off the air, so when they sit down and have a conversation as if this were a radio show and you and I are talking, we've bounced ideas back and forth. We don't know the answers to everything, we don't know each other's opinions to everything. And I remember you telling me, I think it was Colin, how much work he did before he went on air, even walking around the floor and talking to people and trying
Yeah.
out different ideas he was thinking to see what type of a reaction he would get, to gauge if it had value, right? If it was a pertinent, poignant point to bring up in a conversation. It's not, how do I come across? It's all about me. How am I coming across? It's is this topic does this topic have merit? Are people interested in it? Am I getting responses from people because they're thinking about the same topic? And how do we discuss it on air to make that valuable?
So I think you raise a really good point. I remember with Colin, in ESPN, we had great studios. I mean, he had a separate studio for his show, and then Mike and Mike were in a different studio. But I'd walk in at 8 o'clock in the morning, and he's in there with his production team, and he's got a yellow notepad out, and he's kind of scripting the first two segments of the show. Um, and you're right, he would like he'd come up to my office and like try something out. What do you think of this? And he'd actually kind of do the content.
Right.
And, where we are today in 2025 is different than even that period of 10 years ago. Attention spans are at an all-time low. Like you've got somebody looks at what you're doing on television or checks you out in an audio presentation, you've got under 10 seconds to make an impact.
Right.
If you don't make an impact, they go somewhere else. So the prep has become so incredibly important. You can't just waltz in and do a talk show. You know, maybe 10, 15 years ago you could, but there were so many more outlets. You're not just competing with radio stations, you're competing with streaming, and you see this week there was a story about the fact that, television streaming of video is overtaking television now. So all those things, are a factor. And by the way, all those things are an opportunity if you can excel and understand what it is the consumer wants.
Right.
And, in the end, it's all about the consumer. They're in charge. They will determine if you're successful or not. So
Mhm.
you have to really play to that. And hopefully you've got somebody that can, coach you and guide you and give you feedback. I know that's what you're doing. Um, Anything that, resonates today is going to be different than what was resonating even a year ago. And understanding how to convey those messages, that's going to be the difference maker for those who really excel and get ahead of the game.
You're spot on, Mr. Masteller. Well, we try to keep these conversations relatively brief and to a particular time frame so that they're short and sweet and we can share these nuggets, with people in the industry and people looking to grow and develop. As you know, you are a dear friend of mine, and I'm very grateful for you coming on and for sharing your
Sure.
experience. I think you and I definitely share the same passion for coaching and feedback and why it's critical. And we've seen the success that it has on the individuals who seek it out. I also have said repeatedly over the last, you know, 2+ decades, every single talent I've ever met or worked with has never said they've gotten enough feedback. Most of
Yeah.
them say they aren't getting any. And I know that may be a little bit inaccurate from the standpoint that they are working with producers and, program directors and people who are weighing in. But I don't think, to your point, there's enough time spent, even if it's 15 minutes, to just review the show quickly. What were the strengths? Where could we have done things better? How am I coming across, to your point? Am I saying things in a way that's negative when it should be positive? What words do I need to use in my script to flip that? Because sometimes people don't realize how they're coming across, and really work with someone. So we're grateful to have you. Thank you for all that you just shared. There was a ton of
Absolutely.
information there. And I'm just so happy that you hit on things that I think are really important as well. And we will look to have you on again, as they say.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's great to see the work that you're doing, Meg. And what I always believed in, and I know you believe in, you have to have the mindset you want to help others. And some people don't even know about coaching, and then when they finally find out about it,
Yes.
a lot of great things can happen. So thank you for the opportunity, and good luck as you move forward.
Well, thank you. Have a great rest of the day, and we will be in touch to have you on Mic Drop with Meg again.
I look forward to it. Thanks.
Okay. Take care.
Yep.